Book 8. The morning star was dispersing the night and drawing the curtain for shining day, when the east wind fell and the clouds of moisture lifted. A southerly breeze provided a smooth home passage for Cephalus with the troops from Aegina, and after an easy voyage they entered harbor sooner than they had expected. Meanwhile, King Minos was laying waste to the coast of Megara, and trying out his military strength on the city where Nissus reigned, Alcathoi. Nissus's dignified head with its snow-white hair was marked on the crown by a magic lock of resplendent crimson, and on this lock the power of his kingdom depended. 5 moons had waned, and a 6th was newly displaying her horns. The fortunes of war still hung in the scales, as the bird of victory soared and wavered between the kings, but never descended. A tower rose up on the echoing walls of the royal palace, the walls where Apollo, Latona's son, is said to have rested his golden lyre, whose music lingered on in the masonry. Scylla, the daughter of Nissus, would frequently make her way up to play on the musical wall by throwing the smallest of pebbles. That was in peacetime. When war broke out, she would still quite often ascend the tower to watch the battling hosts in contention. As war dragged on, she had come to know the names of the chieftains, their Cretan arms, their horses, their dress, and magnificent quivers. She had specially come to know the face of the leader, Europa's offspring, more indeed than was proper. When Minos covered his head in a casque bedecked with a crest of plumage, she thought, "How handsome that helmeted warrior looks!" And now he was wielding his gleaming bronze-plated shield. How well it became him to wield it. Tensing his muscles, he launched his spear in a graceful curve. Such strength and such skill together excited the young girl's praise. He had leveled his arrow and now was bending his pliant bow. She swore that it might be Apollo there, standing to shoot his arrows. At last he had lifted his visor to bare his face. In his glorious purple cloak, he was mounted astride his milk-white, brightly caparisoned steed, and curbing his charger's foaming mouth. Beside herself with excitement, the daughter of Nissus was almost out of her mind. "How happy the spear which he is grasping," she said to herself. "How happy the reins that his hands are gripping." Girl though she was, she felt a strong impulse to find her way through the enemy lines, if only she might. She was filled with the urge to leap from the top of the tower right down to the Cretan encampment, or open the great bronze gates of the city to welcome the foe, or to do what else King Minos might wish. And while she sat there, raptly watching the sunlit tents of the Lord Knossos, "This heartbreaking war," she said, "should it fill me with grief or joy? I cannot be sure. I adore King Minos, and he is my foe. For that I must grieve. But without the war I should never have known him. Perhaps we could put an end to the war, if he took me hostage, and I should be there beside him. My presence could vouch for the peace. Peerlessly beautiful prince, if your mother Europa was half as lovely as you are, Jupiter's passion was richly deserved. Oh, for the wings of a bird which could waft me down through the air and ground me in Minos's camp. How utterly blessed I should be. I should make myself known and confess my love and ask him what dowry would buy him for me, so long as it wasn't my father's fortress. Indeed, I would rather forswear the bed of my dreams than achieve my desire by treason. Yet often a lenient conqueror's mercy has turned a defeat from shameful loss to glorious gain. The war he is fighting, at least, is just, to avenge the son who is murdered. His cause is strong, and so are the arms that support it. Defeat awaits us, no doubt. If the city is destined to fall, then why should it be for his gallant warriors and not my love to open the gates of my own walls up to him? Better the victory won without carnage, tedious delay, and expense of his own blood. At least I should have no need to fear some soldier in ignorance piercing your manly breast, dear Minos. Who could be so hard-hearted to aim his merciless javelin against you on purpose? Excellent plan. I am fully resolved to surrender myself, with my country as dowry, and bring the war to a speedy conclusion. If wishes were horses, though, beggars would ride. There are sentries on guard, and the keys of the gates are held by my father. He is my only reason, alas, for fear, the only bar to my hopes. I would to God that I had no father, yet God helps those who help themselves, remember, and fortune favors the brave. Another woman whose passion was blazing as strongly as mine would now be already destroying whatever opposed her love, and delight in destroying it. Why should another be braver than I? I'll venture to go through fire and sword, yet fire and sword are not what I need. What I need is my father's magical lock. That crimson lock is far more precious than much fine gold. With the lock I am happy and mistress of all the joy that I pray for. While Scylla was speaking, nature's most potent feeder of heartache, night, came on, and our heroine's boldness increased with the darkness. During that first quiet time when hearts that are weary with cares of the day are enshrouded in sleep, she silently entered Nissus's bedroom and cut the fateful lock from his head, that a daughter should do such a thing to her father. Clutching her impious prize, she made her way through the midst of the foe, self-righteously confident, into the royal presence, and spoke to the horrified Minos. Driven to crime by love, I, Princess Scylla, the daughter of Nissus, surrender to you the gods of my country and household. I ask no reward but yourself. As the pledge of my passion, receive this crimson lock. This is no mere ringlet of hair, believe me. My father's life is now in your power. With hand outstretched, she tendered her damnable gift. King Minos recoiled from her offer, and deeply troubled to witness an act so unparalleled, answered, You blot on our age. I pray that the gods will banish you far from their own bright sphere, and that space is denied you on land and ocean. Certainly I shall never allow my own sphere, Crete, the cradle of Jove, to be made unclean by so evil a monster. He spoke, and after he'd settled affairs with his captured foes, as a just lawgiver, he ordered his crews to untie the hawsers loose from their moorings and row their bronze-prowed warships to sea. When Scylla saw that the keels were launched and afloat on the water, and Minos had given her no reward for her wicked surrender, now that her prayers were exhausted, she shifted to violent anger. With streaming hair and her arms outstretched, she shouted in fury, Where are you fleeing, you traitor, who owe your successes to me? I put you before my country. I put you before my father. Where are you fleeing, pitiless man, whose victory is due to my kindness no less than my crime? Can you not be moved by the present I brought you, moved by my love, or moved by the hopes that I built so wholly on you? You've abandoned me, Minos. Where can I turn? To my native land? But it lies defeated. Suppose it were standing. My own betrayal has barred it to me. Turn to my father, the man I presented to you? My countrymen rightly detest me. The neighboring peoples fear my example. I banished myself from the rest of the world that Crete alone should be open to me. If you exclude me also from Crete and abandon me here, you ungrateful man, it was not Europa who gave you life, but an African quicksand, Armenian Tigris, or swirling Charybdis. Jupiter wasn't your father. He didn't seduce your mother disguised as a bull. That story's a lie. A genuine bull was your true begetter. Take your revenge now, Nissus, my father. Rejoice in my misery, walls of my city that I have so lately betrayed. I confess that I brought it upon myself and deserve to die, but still I could wish my destruction to come from someone I hurt by my treachery. Why should you punish me, Minos, seeing you triumphed because of my guilt? Let my crime against father and country be thought of as service to you. She truly deserved to have you as mate, your adulterous queen, who cheated the fierce-eyed bull with a cow of wood, and the fruit of her womb was a hybrid monster. Do you hear what I'm saying, or are the winds that follow your navy sweeping away my words, you ungrateful creature, to nothing? No wonder at all that Pasiphae worshipped her bull-mate more than she worshipped you, as you were the beastlier creature. Heavens, he's telling his men to row faster. I hear the splash of their dipping oars. The shore and I are receding together. Your haste is in vain. You shan't be allowed to forget what you owe me. Like it or not, I'll follow you, holding tight to your curving stern to be dragged through the length of the sea." She had hardly spoken when into the waves she leapt, and strong in the strength of her passion, she clung, an unwelcome appendage, behind the Gnosian warship. There she was spotted by Nissus. Her father had lately been changed to a falcon with tawny wings and was hovering now in the air. He swooped as she clung to the vessel, to tear at his child with his hooked beak. Scylla, in terror, let go of the stern, and as she was falling, a lighter breeze seemed to sustain her and save her from touching the water. Feathers grew over her arms. Transformed to the shape of a bird, she is known as Cirrus the Shearer, and takes this name from the shorn lock. When Minos had disembarked and stood once again on Cretan soil, he offered the sacrifice, promised to Jove, of 100 bulls, and adorned the walls of his palace with trophies of victory. The family's guilty secret had grown. Pasiphae's bestial adultery now was exposed in her monstrous offspring, the Minotaur. Minos determined to hide this disgrace to his marriage bed inside the twistings and turns of a dark, inextricable maze. The labyrinth then was built by an eminent master craftsman, Daedalus, who had obscured all guiding marks and designed it to cheat the eye with bewildering patterns of tortuous alleys. Just as the Phrygian river Meander sports and plays in his running stream with the ebb and flow of his teasing course, as he bends right back on himself, he can see his water advancing, and keeps his wavering currents in motion back to their headspring or out to the open sea. So Daedalus's warren of passages wandered this way and that. In such a treacherous maze, its very designer could scarcely retrace his steps to the entrance. Here Minos confined his monster son, half man, half bull, and fed him twice on the blood of Athenian youths and maidens, chosen by lot as tribute exacted at 9-year intervals. But the third repast destroyed the Minotaur. One of the youths, Prince Theseus, was aided by fair Ariadne, the daughter of Minos. Rewinding the thread that she gave him, he found the elusive entrance which none had regained before him. He carried the princess off and sailed to Naxos, but there on the shore he cruelly abandoned his loving companion. She wept and wailed in her lonely plight, till Baucis swept her up in his arms and came to her rescue. "My star," he declared, "you must shine forever." Removing the crown from her forehead, he launched it skyward. It whirled and spun through the air, and during its flight the gems were changed into brilliant fires, coming to rest once more in the shape of a jeweled circlet between the kneeler and bright Ophiuchus, who holds the snake. Daedalus now had come to detest his protracted exile in Crete, and was longing to visit his native country again. But his way was barred by the sea. "King Minos can block my escape by land or water," he sighed. "The air, at least, is still open. My path lies there. He is lord of the world, but not lord of the sky." So saying, he put his mind to techniques unexplored before, and altered the laws of nature. He carefully layered some feathers, the smallest to start with, the shorter position next to the longer. You'd think they had grown like that, as sometimes rustic panpipes rise in a gradual slope with their reeds of unequal length. And then he bound them with twine in the middle and wax at the bottom. This neatly compacted plumage he curved in a gentle camber to imitate real birds' wings. His young son Icarus, standing beside him and little aware of the threat to himself he was touching, smiled as he caught at the feathers fluttering in the breeze, and now and again he would carelessly soften the yellow wax with his thumb, enjoying his game as he meddled and interfered with his father's wonderful work. But soon the finishing touches were deftly laid, and Daedalus balanced his aged body on both of his wings, then beat at the air and hovered suspended. Next he instructed his son, "Now, Icarus, listen carefully. Keep to the middle way. If you fly too low, the water will clog your wings. If you fly too high, they'll be scorched by fire. Fly between sea and sun. No need to determine your course by Boetes, the bear, or Orion's naked sword, like a sailor. Simply follow my lead. As he gave his pupil his flying orders, he fitted the wings on the boy's inexperienced shoulders. And while he did it, the old man's cheeks were wet with his tears, and his hands were trembling in fatherly fear. Then, kissing the lips of his darling son for the very last time, he rose on his wings and flew in front, as afraid for the lad as a bird escorting her fledgling out of her mountain nest to float on the breezes. "Follow," he cried, as he taught him the skills that would prove his downfall. Moving his own 2 wings, he kept looking back at his sons. They were spied by a fisherman dangling his catch on his quivering rod, a shepherd at rest on his crook, and a plowman steering his plowshare. All watched in amazement, thinking, they certainly must be gods to fly through the air. Now Juno's island, Samos, was coming up on the left. Delos and Paros were far behind them. Lebynthos lay to the right with the honey-rich land Calymne, when all this adventurous flying went to Icarus's head. He ceased to follow his leader. He'd fallen in love with the sky and soared up higher and higher. The scorching rays of the sun grew closer and softened the fragrant wax which fastened his plumage. The wax dissolved, and as Icarus flapped his naked arms, deprived of the wings which had caught the air that was buoying them upwards, "Father!" he shouted again and again. But the boy and his shouting were drowned in the blue-green main which is called the Icarian Sea. His unhappy father, no longer a father, called out, "Icarus! Where are you, Icarus? Where on earth shall I find you? Icarus!" he kept crying, and then he caught sight of the wings in the water. Daedalus cursed the skill of his hands and buried his dear son's corpse in a grave. The land where he lies is known as Icaria. As Daedalus laid his poor son's body to rest in an earth mound, out of a muddy field drain peeped a chattering partridge, who loudly clapped with its wings and uttered a cry of triumph. New at the time to the feathered kingdom, unseen before, it had lately been changed to a bird, and was Daedalus's standing reproach. The craftsman's sister, unhappily blind to the future, had trusted her precious son to him as a pupil. The child was a boy of high intelligence, 12 years old, and responsive to teaching. He'd even observed the pattern of bones on the spine of a fish, and taken that as a model, cutting a series of teeth in a strip of metal, and so devising the common handsaw. He had also invented the compasses, joining 2 pieces of iron on a single hinge. If the legs remained at a constant distance, one point could be fixed while the other described a perfect circle. Daedalus, though, was jealous, and threw him headlong down from the sacred hill of Minerva, pretending he'd slipped. But Pallas, the goddess who fosters artistic talent, caught him and turned him, still in midair, to a bird and covered his body in feathers. Nevertheless, the strength of his quick intelligence filtered into his wings and feet, and he stayed with his old name, Perdix. The bird, however, can't lift its body far from the earth, or build its nest in the branches of trees or on mountainous crags. It flutters close to the ground and lays its eggs in the hedgerows, never forgetting that fall long ago and frightened of heights. Daedalus now was exhausted and found a home in Sicily. Cocalus welcomed the suppliant kindly, and armed to defend him. Back to the story of Theseus. Thanks to the glorious hero, Athens had ceased to pay King Minos her dismal tribute. Her temples were wreathed with flowers, and the citizens called on Minerva, goddess of war, on Jove and the other gods, whom they duly worshipped with animal sacrifice, gifts, and caskets of incense. Wandering rumor had published the name of Theseus throughout the cities of Argos, and his was the help that the peoples of wealthy Greece entreated whenever they fell into serious danger. His was the help that Calydon humbly and anxiously begged for, although she had Meleäger. The reason for her request was the boar that served and championed the wrath of Diana. King Oeneus, the story goes, gave thanks for a year of plenty by yielding the grain's first fruits to Ceres, and pouring libations of oil to fair-haired Minerva, and wine to its deity Bacchus. After the rural powers, The gods of the sky were given were given the honor they all desired. Diana alone was forgotten. Her altars, they say, were neglected and languished without any incense. The gods can feel anger too. This slight shall not go unpunished, she cried. To gain her vengeance, the injured goddess dispatched a boar through the fields of Aetolia, huge as the bulls that graze on grassy Epirus, and even more huge than the bulls of Sicily. Blood and fire were aglow in his eyes. His neck was stiff, with bristles as firm as serried spears, or the stakes on a rampart. His massive flanks were flecked with a spray of seething foam from his grunting snorts. His tusks were as long as an Indian elephant's. Lightning flashed from his mouth, and his breath blast shriveled the grassland. He'd either trample the young corn down while still in the blade, or reap the crop which the farmer had prayed for and soon would mourn. By destroying the full-grown grain in the ear, so the promised harvest never arrived at the threshing floor or the waiting granary. Bunches of grapes were strewn on the ground with their trailing vine shoots. So were the berries and branches that fell from the evergreen olives. The flocks had also to suffer his fury. Dogs and shepherds failed to protect them, nor could the fierce bulls guard the cattle. The country folk fled from their farms and only felt they were safe behind the walls of their towns, until Meleäger assembled his band of fighters, inspired, like him, with the longing for glory. Such were Castor and Pollux, the twins whom Leda, the wife of Tyndareus, mothered. The one an outstanding boxer, the other a brilliant rider. Jason, who built the first ship, Argo. Theseus, along with his bosom friend, Pirithous. Thestius' sons, Plexippus and Toxeus. Lynceus and fleet-footed Idas. The sons of Apharius. Caenus, now no longer a woman. Fierce Leucippus, Acastus, a splendid javelin thrower. Hippothous, Dryas and Phoenix, the son of a Mentor. Actor's two sons, Eurytus and Teatus. Phyleus, who hailed from Elis. Telamon too, and Peleus, the father of mighty Achilles. Admetus, the son of Phares. Boeotian Iolaus, tireless Eurytion, joined by Echion, invincible runner. Lelex from Locrian Nerisum, Panopeus, Hilius, and bloodthirsty Hippasus, Nestor of Pylos still in the prime of his life, and Spartan Hippoquon's sons, whom he sent from ancient Amyclae. Ulysses' father Laertes, Ancaeus born in Arcadia, Mopsus the prophet, and Amphiaraus, not yet betrayed by his wife. Atalanta, the pride of the forests on Mount Lycaeus, whose robe was clasped at the neck by a buckle of polished metal, her hair very simply gathered up in a single knot. Rattling on her left shoulder, there hung the ivory quiver that guarded her arrows, above the bow that she held in her left hand. So much for her garb, and as for her face, you could truthfully call it a girlish face for a boy, or a boyish face for a girl. The moment he saw Atalanta, the young Calydonian hero longed to possess her, though heaven opposed it. The flames of his passion stole through his heart, and he cried, "How happy the man that maiden chooses to wed!" The occasion and natural shyness forbade him to speak any further. The mighty contest ahead was more pressing. The scene is a dense primeval forest, untouched by the axe. It starts on a level plateau and looks out over the sloping country below. When the hunters arrived, some spread their nets, another group slipped their hounds from the leash, while others followed the well-marked spoor, all keen to unearth their dangerous quarry. Then picture a valley basin, where streams of rainwater trickle down from the hills to a marshy dell, well filled at the bottom with pliant osiers, light sedge-grass, and dense swamp rushes, withies and tall bulrushes with short reeds growing below. It was here that the boar was roused from his covert, and violently hurled himself straight at his foes, like lightning struck from the clashing clouds. The trees were flattened beneath his onslaught. The trunks crashed down as he butted against them. Loudly hallooing, the heroes bravely brandished their glittering, broad-tipped spears in front of their bodies. The boar charged forward, scattering the various hounds which obstructed his fury, dispersing the baying pack with his thrusts at their flanks. The first long spear to be thrown was launched from Echion's shoulder, but all to no purpose. It merely grazed the trunk of a maple. The next one flew from the sturdy hand of Thessalian Jason. This looked as if it would firmly lodge in the back of its target, but too much force was behind the throw, and it overshot. Then Mopsus cried to Apollo, "Hear me, Phoebus, I honor you now as I ever did, so guide my spear where I aim it." The god complied as far as he could. The boar was struck, but without being wounded. Diana lifted the tip of the javelin off in its flight. The weapon arrived, but the point had gone missing. The wild beast's anger was stirred and blazed like terrible lightning. Fire flashed forth from his eyes, and the breath of his nostrils was flame. As a massive rock that is forcefully flung from the sling of a catapult flies through the air to demolish a wall or a tower full of soldiers, so were the blows of the hog, whose charge on the huntsman was no less deadly. He flattened Hippalmus and Pelagon, there on the right to protect the wing. Immediately others moved forward to rescue their fallen friends, but Hippoquon's son, Anasemus, failed to escape those death-dealing tusks. As he started to run in a panic, the animal slashed at his knee, and the strength of his tendons deserted him. Even Nestor might well have perished before he went to the Trojan War, but using his spear as a pole, he vaulted powerfully up to land on a branch of the nearest tree, and there, with his safety assured, looked down on the foe he had fled from. The boar then savagely whetted his tusks on the trunk of an oak tree, threatening death. Then putting his trust in his sharpened weapons, he ripped with his turned-up snout at the thigh of the mighty Hippasus. Now Castor and Pollux, the heavenly twins before they were stars, came forward, both magnificent sights, both riding on horses whiter than gleaming snow, both proudly brandishing spears which quivered within their grasp as the metal tips flashed in the sunlight. Those spears would surely have wounded the boar, but the bristly creature had slunk off into the thickets where horses and spears could not reach him. Telamon went in pursuit. His excitement made him unwary. His foot was caught in the roots of a tree, and he fell on his face. While Peleus was trying to lift him up, Atalanta was ready to notch a swift arrow, bend her bow, and send her shaft flying. It lodged underneath the animal's ear after narrowly grazing the top of his back, so his bristles were stained with a trickle of blood. The success of her shot gave joy to the girl, but even more so to young Meleäger. He saw the blood first, as the story goes, and he was the first to point it out to his comrades and greet Atalanta. "A glorious deed! You deserve a reward and shall have it." The men were blushing with shame. They boosted morale by shouting and urging the next man on, then hurling their weapons at random, so obstructing each other's efforts and making them useless. There now was Ancaeus, wielding his two-headed axe. Furiously tempting fortune, he cried, "My friends, let me show you how far the arms of a man outclass a mere woman's. Leave this to me. Latona's daughter herself can protect the boar with her arrows. My own right hand shall destroy him, despite the will of Diana." The words had sprung from his boastful lips in the swell of his pride. Then lifting the double-headed axe in both of his hands, he rose high up on his toes, all poised for the downward stroke. He was bold, but the boar was before him and drove him with two sharp tusks at the upper part of the groin, where the pathway to death is the shortest. Ancaeus collapsed. His bowels burst in a seething mixture of gore and gut, and the earth beneath him was soaked with his blood. Pirithous, son of Ixion, now ventured to enter the battle against the monster. His strong right hand was shaking his boar spear when Theseus cried out, "Keep back! Your life is dearer to me than my own. You are half of my soul. Brave heroes may fight at a prudent distance." Ancaeus was brave, but his rashness destroyed him. With that, he himself discharged his weighty, bronze-tipped javelin. Beautifully poised, the weapon seemed likely to reach its mark, but its flight through the air was blocked by a leafy branch on an oak tree. Jason also sent his spear flying. and this was diverted by chance from the boar to an innocent dog who was pierced in the flank. The weapon ran through the poor yelper and pinned him fast to the ground. Meleäger's throwing was more successful. He launched 2 spears. The first hit the ground, but the second struck home in the back of his quarry. At once, as the boar struggled wildly, spinning around in a circle, bubbling with foam at the mouth and streaming with blood from his new wound, the man who had dealt it advanced to provoke his prey to fresh fury, and, as it attacked, to bury his gleaming boar spear deep in its shoulders. His friends cheered loudly to signal their joy in his triumph, eager to clasp the victorious hero's hand in their own. They gazed in awe at the size of the great brute, sprawling over so vast an expanse of the earth. They still believed it was dangerous to touch it, but each of them separately dipped his spear in the blood. Meleäger himself then planted his foot on that merciless head and hailed Atalanta. "Now take the prize which is mine by right, Nonacrian maid. My glory must surely be shared with you." At once he presented the girl with his spoils, the spiky hide of the bristled boar, and its head and the pride of its huge white tusks. Atalanta's joy in the gift was matched by her joy in the giver, but others were jealous and angry murmurs ran through the crowd. Meleager's uncles, Plexippus and Toxius, stretching their arms out, shouted, "Down with these spoils! You're a woman, don't try to usurp the honors due to us men. You'd better not trust to your beauty too far. Your generous lover may not be there to defend you." At once they seized the spoils from the girl and removed Meleager's right to award them. This was too much for a son of Mars. Grinding his teeth in rising fury, he tackled them boldly. "You filchers of others' prizes, you seem unaware of the vital difference that lies between threats and actions." Then taking Plexippus quite by surprise, he plunged his sword through his uncle's heart. What was Toxius to do? He wavered, hoping to take revenge for his brother, but also afraid of sharing his brother's fate. He was not permitted to waver for long. Meleager's sword, still warm with the blood of one kinsman, was heated again by the others. Queen Althea was bearing gifts to the temples in thanks for her son's great feat when she saw men bearing her brother's corpses. Wildly beating her breast, she filled the streets of the city with cries of lament and changed her garments from gold to black. But as soon as the name of the killer was published, her sorrow was totally banished. Her tears dried up and yielded to passion for vengeance. At the time when Althea was giving birth to her son Meleager, a fragment of wood had been cast in the fire on the hearth by the 3 fates. Spinning with thumb and finger at destiny's threads, the sisters uttered these words. "We assign the same lifespan to this wooden log as we do to this newborn child." The spell was cast and the goddesses made their departure. At once the mother extracted the burning branch from the flames and doused it in running water. For years that log had been hidden away in the depths of an inner storeroom, and thus had preserved the life of the young prince. His mother now brought it out. She ordered her servants to lay some pine wood and kindling, and then she applied the fatal taper. 4 times she withdrew it. A conflict raged between mother and sister. The 2 names pulled at the single heart in the tug of war. Often her cheeks grew pale in dread of the crime she was plotting. Her eyes would as often be red with the burning anger that glowed there. One moment her face would assume an expression suggestive of cruel vengeance. The next you might well suppose she was moved by compassion. Once her tears had been dried by the heat of her violent anger, they gushed once more from her sorrowful eyes. As a vessel at sea which is caught between wind and tide and pulled in different directions, subject to 2 strong forces, uncertainty wavers between them. So Thestius's daughter wavered between her warring emotions, quenching her anger again and again, at once to rekindle it. But now the sister began to overpower the mother. To appease the ghosts of her blood by bloodshed, family duty was intermingled with family guilt. When the flames of devouring fire grew strong, she prayed that the funeral pyre might consume her own flesh too. Grimly clutching the fateful log, she took her stand, poor lady, before that altar of death, and cried, "Eumenides, 3 dread sisters, powers of punishment, turn your gaze on these sacred rites of retributive fury. Vengeance is mine by sin, and death is atoned for by death. Crime must needs be added to crime, and a body to bodies. Perish the guilt-cursed house, in sorrow heaped upon sorrow. Is Oeneus blithely to take delight in his son's fine victory, while Thestius grieves for his loss? Better that both should mourn. I pray to the shades and the newly departed souls of my brethren, take regard of the honor I show you. Accept my sacrifice, offered at such dear cost, the evil fruit of my own womb. Stop, Althea, you brothers of mine, pray pardon a mother. I cannot go on, my hands are too weak. I freely admit he deserves to die, but I cannot become my own son's murderer. And so must he go unpunished, to live victorious and mount the throne of Calydon, puffed with the pride of his impious triumph, while you lie dead in a handful of ash, poor shivering ghosts? I cannot allow it. The wretch must die. Let him carry off with him his father's hopes and his kingdom, and lay his country in ruins. Oh, where is my mother's heart, the love that I owe to my own child? What of the pains I endured as those 9 long months went by? How dearly I wish you had burnt in that earlier fire, and I had suffered the loss of my baby. You owed your life to my giving, now owe your death to your own deserts. Now take your reward. Now return the life that was doubly given you, once when I bore you, once when I rescued the log, or lay me next to my brothers. I wish for his death, but am powerless, confused. One moment I picture my brother's wounds and that seed of murderous carnage, but then my spirit is broken by love, and the name that I own as a mother. Oh, I am lost. Though your triumph is evil, you win, my brothers, so long as I am granted a share in the comfort I bring you, and follow you down to the shades. When she'd spoken these words, she averted her face, as with trembling hand she tossed the death brand into the blaze. The log itself gave a moan of pain, or so it appeared, when the fire reluctantly caught at the wood and it burst into flames. Meleäger, away from the house, knew nothing of this, but the flames began to burn at him too. He could feel his vitals scorching with hidden fire. He bravely mastered the terrible pain, but still it was hard to be facing a bloodless death like a coward. Lucky Ancaeus, he thought, he died of his wounds. Pathetically moaning, he called on his aged father, his brother, and loving sisters, and now with his dying breath on the wife he had slept with, perhaps on his mother too. The fire and his pain flared up and then subsided again, till both were extinguished together. His spirit gradually filtered into the insubstantial air as the ashes gradually shrouded the glowing embers. Calydon's heights brought low, all sorrowed, both young and old, nobles and common folk wailed alike. By the river of Venice, the mothers of Calydon tore at their tresses and smote on their bosoms. Sprawled on the ground, Meleager's old father begrimed his face and his hoary hairs in the dust, cursing the length of his days. Aware of her frightful deed, his mother had used her guilty hand to punish herself by thrusting a sword in her vitals. As for the dismal plaints of his wretched sisters, I could not rehearse them, had I been granted by heaven 100 tongues, unlimited wit, and the inspiration of all the muses. Reckless of all decorum, they bruised their breasts with their fist blows, and while the body was there, they stroked it over and over, kissing their brother, and kissing the bier now laid on the pyre. When he'd burnt to ashes, they gathered them up and pressed the urn to their hearts, then prostrate over his tomb, they clung to the gravestone, weeping until their tears poured into the name that was carved there. Sated at last with the havoc she'd wreaked on the house of Parthenon, Diana made feathers sprout from their bodies. From all except Gorgi and Deianira, she stretched long wings on the arms of the rest. She turned their lips to horny beaks, and thus transformed into guinea fowl. Up the sisters were lifted and launched on the breezes. Theseus, having discharged his role in the communal boar hunt, was now on his journey home to Erechtheus's city of Athens. His way was barred by a river in flood, the god Acheloüs, who forced him to wait. "Pray enter my house, illustrious hero of Cecrops's line. Do not trust yourself to these greedy waters. Beware of the thick tree trunks and zigzagging boulders rolling and crashing down. I have seen the flood tide sweeping away the lofty stables, cattle and all, that adjoin my margins. The ox's strength and the horse's speed have availed them nothing. After the snows on the mountain have melted, this torrent has also claimed the lives of many young men in its eddying currents. Safer to rest for a while, till my swollen stream is confined to its wonted channel limits and narrowed down to its natural channel. Yes, Acheloüs, replied the hero, I'll gladly avail myself of your house and advice. And he made good use of them both. Theseus entered a grotto of porous pumice and rough-grained tufa. The soft earth floor beneath him was watery moss, while the ceiling was paneled with rows of mussel and murex shells. Now that the sun god had run 2/3 of his course to the evening, Theseus and his companions reclined on their several couches. On one side sat Pirithous, son of Ixion. There sat Lelex of Troezen, starting now to go grey round the temples, and other guests whom the Acarnanian river had honoured no less in his pleasure at welcoming so distinguished a visitor. At once barefooted nymphs set tables beside them and loaded these with a lavish banquet. Then, when the food was removed, unwatered wine was offered in jeweled cups. At this point Theseus, looking over the sea below them and pointing, inquired, What place is that? And tell me the name of the island facing us there, which hardly looks like a single island. The river god answered, The land you see doesn't form one whole. 5 islands are there, but the distance obscures the gaps that divide them. Diana's resentment in sending the boar was nothing to wonder at. These islands used to be Naiads who put 10 bullocks to slaughter and then invited the rural gods to share in the feasting. But when they started the ritual dance, they forgot about me. I swelled in my rage and swept along in as mighty a spate as I ever achieve, the power of my waters matching the power of my wrath. I sundered forest from forest and field from field, and rolled the place where the nymphs were standing into the waves. They remembered me then. My waters next combined with the sea to split the continuous land mass and break it up into 5 to form the Echinades, hedgehog isles, that you see in mid-ocean. But look, you can spot it yourself far off in the distance, my favorite, a single island beyond the rest. Perimele, the sailors call it. I loved that girl and stole her virginity from her. Her father Hippodamus took it unkindly and forcibly pushed his erring daughter over a cliff to be drowned in the waves. I caught her up, and supporting her while she swam, cried out, Neptune, lord of the trident, whose realm is the wandering ocean, second alone to the heavens, I pray for your help. Grant space to an innocent drowned by a cruel father, or let her become a space in herself. As I spoke, new land enfolded her floating limbs, and an island of substance grew from her transformed body. The river god held his peace. His amazing story had moved the whole of the company. One poured scorn on their credulous wonder, Pirithous, a young tearaway who had no use for the gods. Pure fiction, he said. Acheloüs, you credit the gods with too much power if you think they create and then alter the shapes in nature. All were aghast at these blasphemous words and voiced disapproval, especially Lelex, whose mind reflected his riper years. The power of heaven cannot be measured, he answered firmly. It knows no bounds. Whatever the gods decree is accomplished. To ease your impious doubts, you should visit the Phrygian hills, to look at an oak tree and linden nearby, both ringed by a low wall. I've been to the place myself, when Pythias sent me from Troezen to Phrygia's lands, where his father Pelops had once been king. Not far from the spot is a fen which used to be habitable land, but is now under water and haunted merely by coots and divers. Jupiter once came here, disguised as a mortal, and with him his son, the messenger Mercury, wand and wings set aside. Looking for shelter and rest, they called at 1,000 homesteads. 1,000 doors were bolted against them. One house, however, did make them welcome, a humble abode with a roof of straw and marsh reed, one that knew its duty to gods and men. Here good Philemon and Baucis had happily passed their youth, and here they had reached old age, enduring their poverty lightly, by owning it freely and being content with the little they had. If you came, it made no difference to ask for the masters or servants. The household consisted of two, each giving and taking the orders. So when the gods had found their way to this humble dwelling, the door was so low they could only cross the threshold by stooping, Philemon moved forward a bench and asked them to rest their limbs, while Baucis bustled around to spread a rough covering over it. Then crossed to the hearth to brush the wood ash away from the embers of yesterday's fire and bring it to life by feeding it leaves and dry tree bark, with only her feeble puffing for bellows. Then fetching some splits of kindling and pieces of dry branch down from the roof, she broke them up further and set them under her bronze pot. Next she stripped the outer leaves of the cabbage her husband had picked from his watered garden, while he, with the help of a forked stick, lifted a chine of bacon off from the blackened beam, and chopped a piece from the back they had carefully saved for so long, then dropped the cut in the pot to cook in the boiling water. While all were waiting, they passed the time in agreeable talk, and the hours went by in a flash. On a hook there was hanging a sturdy-handled bucket of beechwood, and this was filled with warm water so that the guests could wash their limbs. A sedge-stuffed cushion was laid on top of a couch with a frame and legs of willow wood. Then it was covered with drapes, which were only brought out on special occasions, still tawdry and worn if they didn't disgrace the couch. The gods reclined, with their skirts tucked up and with shaking hands. With her skirts tucked up and with shaking hands, old Baucis positioned a three-legged table beside them. But one of the legs was too short, and she had to level it up with a potsherd. Once the table was steady, she wiped its surface with green mint, then laid a spread of unsalted olives, both green and black, endive and radish, pickle of autumn cornel cherries, cream cheese, and eggs very lightly cooked on a moderate ash heat, served in earthenware dishes. When that was finished, a molded wine bowl of similar silver was set on the table with goblets carved out of beech and coated with golden wax on the inside. After that, it did not take long for the hot main course to be brought from the hearth. The young wine next was returned to the table, but soon removed for a while to clear the space for dessert, consisting of nuts with a mixture of figs and wrinkled palm dates, plums and sweet-smelling apples arranged in broad flat baskets, grapes new-picked from the purple vine with a honeycomb placed in the table's center. To crown this humble fare, the smiles on the old folks' faces betokened a wealth of unfailing kindness. Meanwhile, whenever the mixing bowl got empty, it seemed to refill of its own accord, with the wine welling up by itself. Stunned and scared by this wonder, Philemon, trembling, and Baucis lifted their upturned hands to heaven and fervently prayed for forgiveness after serving so poorly prepared a repast. They then set out to placate their mysterious guests by killing the goose, their only one, which guarded the tiny farm. But the bird kept fluttering around, exhausting the elderly couple and long eluding their grasp, till at last it appeared to have flown to the gods themselves for refuge. "You must not kill it," they said. "We are gods. Your neighbors shall pay the price they deserve for their wicked impiety. You alone shall be spared from the coming disaster. We simply ask you to leave your home and walk in our footsteps up to the mountains." The couple obeyed, and using their sticks to support them, they wearily climbed the long, steep slope. They were just a bowshot away from the top when they turned and saw that the other houses were under water, with only their own still standing. And while they gazed in amazement, lamenting the fate of their neighbors, their little old cottage, a small home even for two to inhabit, was changed into a temple. The fork-shaped props were replaced by columns, the thatch turned yellow, and now it appeared that the roof was gilded, the doors engraved with reliefs, and the ground paved over with marble. At last King Jupiter gently addressed them. "You good old man, and you the wife that his goodness deserves, now name whatever boon you desire." Philemon conferred for a moment with Baucis before advising the gods of their joint decision. "We ask to be priests and to guard your temple, and since we have passed our years together in peace, let the same hour carry us off, so I need not look on my dear wife's grave, nor she have to bury my body." Their wish was granted. As long as life was allowed them, they served as the temple's guardians. When time had taken its final toll, and while they were casually standing in front of the steps of the building, telling the sanctuary's history, both Philemon and Baucis witnessed their partner sprouting leaves on their worn old limbs. As the tops of the trees spread over their faces, they spoke to each other once more while they could. "Farewell, my beloved," they said in a single breath, as the bark closed over their lips and concealed them forever. Still to this day, the peasants of Phrygia point to the oak and the linden nearby, which once were the forms of Philemon and Baucis. The story was told me by trustworthy elders who had no reason to lie or deceive. I saw for myself the wreaths that were hanging upon the branches, and, placing a fresh wreath, murmured, "Let those who are loved by the gods be gods, and those who have worshipped be worshipped." Lelex fell silent. All had been moved by the tale and its teller, Theseus especially. "Tell me more of the wonders performed by the gods," he cried. Then, leaning upon his elbow, the river of Calydon said to him, "Bravest of heroes, we know of a number whose form has changed only once, and never again been altered. Others have had the power to assume a whole range of shapes, like Proteus, a god who dwells in the earth-encompassing ocean. Men saw him both as a handsome youth and a ravening lion. At other times he became a savage boar, or a bull with a pair of menacing horns, or a serpent dangerous to handle. He often could appear like the stones, and often again like the trees. Sometimes he'd turn into flowing water and take the form of a river. Sometimes he'd change to the contrary element, fire. Erysichthon's daughter, Mestra, the wife of Daedalus, also possessed such a power. Her father was one who despised the gods, and the savor of burning sacrifice never rose up from his altars. He, as the story goes, audaciously took an axe to the grove of Ceres and desecrated her ancient woodland. Standing there was a mighty oak of great antiquity, a wood on its own. It was hung all round with suppliant wool bands, votive tablets, and garlands offered for prayers fulfilled. In its shade the Dryads often conducted their festal dances. Hand in hand they would trip and circle around the trunk, whose girth was more than 22 feet, while its height exceeded the rest of the trees by as much as they toppled the grass beneath them. But that was no cause for the wild Thessalian brute Erysichthon to hold his axe at a distance. He ordered his slaves to get cutting the sacred oak at its base. Then, seeing them shrink from the task, the infidel seized an axe from one of them, savagely shouting, "This needn't be merely the goddess's tree, but the goddess herself for all I care. But its leafy top must be brought to the ground." With that, as he raised his threatening weapon to strike from the side, the oak of Ceres gave a great shudder and uttered a groan. A pallor crept over the acorns, the leaves, and the length of the branches. As soon as that impious hand had inflicted a wound on the trunk, blood poured from the shattered bark as it streams from the severed neck of a huge sacrificial bull when it falls in front of the altar. All were appalled, but one who was bolder than all the others endeavored to halt this evil and counter the axe's cruelty. Seeing him, "Here's the reward for your piety," cried Erysichthon, and switched the axe from the tree to his servant to lop the man's head, before returning to hack away at the oak's great side. Suddenly then, from the heart of the tree, a voice rang out. "I am the nymph, beloved of Ceres, who dwells in this oak. I prophesy now as I die. Vengeance will come. You shall pay the price for your impious deed and make amends for my death." But the monster pursued his crime to the end. Reeling under his numberless blows, heaved down by ropes, the oak tree finally crashed to the ground and toppled a mass of the forest beneath it. Horrified by this loss to the woods and of one of their sisters, the Dryads all vested themselves in garments of mourning black and hastened to Ceres to beg her to punish the vile Erysichthon. The goddess agreed, and as she nodded her beautiful head, she shook the fields, now heavily laden with ripening corn, and contrived a revenge which might have excited pity, except that no one could possibly pity a man who had acted so shamefully. "Let pestilent hunger torture his body," was her grim sentence. And since she could not approach that demon herself, for the fates will never let Ceres and hunger meet, she called to a rural Oread, one of the mountain spirits, and gave her instructions. Go to a place on the farthest borders of icy Scythia, gloomy terrain where the earth is barren of crops and of trees. Sluggish cold has its home in that land with pallor and trembling, ravenous hunger too. Tell hunger to fasten herself in the cursed maw of that impious man, and never to yield to abundance of food. Let her vie with my nourishing power and defeat it. Do not be dismayed by the length of your journey. Take my chariot, harness my serpents, and guide their course through the heavens on high. The Oread took the dragon chariot and drove through the air till she landed in Scythia. There, on the heights of the rugged Caucasus Mountains, she freed her snakes from the yoke and quickly departed in search of hunger. She tracked her down in a stony wasteland. The spirit was plucking with nail and tooth at the scanty herbage. Her hair was tangled, her eyes like hollows, complexion pallid, her lips grimy and gray, her throat scabrous and scurfy. Her skin was so hard and fleshless the entrails were visible through it. Her shrunken bones protruded under her sagging loins. Her belly was merely an empty space. Her pendulous breasts appeared to be strung on nothing except the cage of her backbone. Her leanness had swollen all of her joints. The rounds of her knees were bulbous. Her ankles were grossly enlarged to a puffy excrescence. The Oread spied her, but lacking the courage to move any closer, carefully kept her distance to give her the goddess's message. Instantly, though she remained far off and despite her recent arrival, she felt a sensation of hunger and turned the chariot round to pilot the serpents back through the sky to Thessaly. Hunger acted on Ceres' bidding, although their functions were always opposed. She directed her flight on the wind to the palace as ordered, and rapidly made her way to the reprobate's chamber. It was night, and she found him buried in sleep. Then, twining her arms around him, she poured herself deep inside as she breathed on his throat, on his breast, on his mouth, and dispersed starvation throughout his veins. Her mission accomplished, she left the world of plenty behind her, and took herself back to the caves she knew in the mansions of want. Gentle sleep on her peaceful wings still had held Erysichthon fast in her soothing embrace. In his dreams, he craved for a meal, as he munched away on a void and ground his teeth to no purpose, gulping down imaginary food in his cheated esophagus, vainly devouring a banquet of air without any substance. But when he awoke, a passion for eating was raging inside him, reigning supreme in his ravenous gullet and burning belly. At once he demands to be filled with the produce of earth, sea, and sky. When tables loaded with food are provided, he moans, "I am starving." A banquet is laid before him. Food, he demands. What could satisfy cities or even a nation will not be enough for his single appetite. The fuller he crammed his insatiable maw, his hunger grew stronger, just as the ocean absorbs the streams that flow from a whole land, yet still unsatisfied, drains the waters of far-off rivers. Or just as a raging fire will never refuse any fuel, but burns an infinite number of logs, the more it is fed, the more it requires, abundance merely augmenting its greed. So a feast had only to touch Erysichthon's impious lips, and he asked for more. His food had simply become a reason for food. His eating always led on to an empty stomach. Appetite now had diminished his father's wealth as he swallowed it down in his belly's abyss, but the pangs of his desperate hunger remained undiminished. The flames of his still unsatisfied gluttony rose to new heights. At last, with his capital wasted inside him, his daughter was all he had left. Though she little deserved such a father, he sold her off with the rest. Too noble to tolerate slavery, Mestra ran to the edge of the sea, and stretching her arms out, shouted to Neptune, "You snatched the prize of my maidenly virtue, now snatch me away from life as a drudge." The god who had raped her did not say no to her prayer. Though her owner was in pursuit, and had just caught sight of her, Neptune altered her form, and gave her the face of a man in a fisherman's garb. When her master set eyes on this stranger, he said, Hey, you there, casting your line and hook with a tiny morsel to hide it. I wish you a clear calm sea and a gullible fish which will rise to your bait till it's caught and landed. Tell me, where is the woman I saw just now? She was standing here on the shore in shabby clothes, with her hair disheveled. I saw her, I tell you. You must know, surely. Her tracks stop here. Mestra saw that the god's protection was working. Delighted at being questioned about herself, she quickly responded, Excuse me, sir, whoever you are. My eyes have been fixed on the water here. In my concentration on fishing, they've never wandered. I swear by Neptune, the god of the sea, who I pray will assist my skill. Throughout this time, no man has stood on this part of the shore, except for myself, and no woman either. Her owner believed her, turned on his heels, and trudged through the sand as he went off duped, and Mestra recovered her normal shape. When her father saw that his daughter's body could be transformed, he sold her a number of times to different owners, but then she would change to a bird or a mare or a cow or a deer, and escape from them, so providing her gluttonous sire with his fraudulent fodder. But after his violent affliction had wasted away the whole of his substance and nothing was left to fuel his virulent malady, he finally started to bite his own limbs and tear them apart with his jaws. The poor wretch nourished his body by making it smaller. Why should I dwell on the stories of others? Why should I dwell on the stories of others? I, Acheloüs, possess the power to alter my shape in a limited number of ways, young Theseus. Sometimes I am as you see me now, sometimes I change to a serpent, or lead the herd as a strong-horned bull, or did when I could. But now one side of my forehead has lost its defense, as you can see for yourself. And he sighed as he ended.